Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Today and True Crime and Portraits podcast. I'm your host, Jane Flowers. On today's true crime episode, I will be talking about how the Attorney General's office in Jackson, Mississippi supports white-collar crime by not investigating organized criminals involved with my breach of fiduciary I have with my trust. These same criminals are also using my mother's name with identity theft. Today's true crime story begins in 2001 when my mother, Brenda B. Flowers, opened up a bank account at Trustmark Bank in Greenwood, Mississippi with another person's Social Security number, so she could use this other person's Social Security number to embezzle from my trust fund with the help of attorney Floyd Melton Jr. I found out about this fraudulent bank account that was opened up with another person's Social Security number last year when I got a copy of the bank statement from my sister, Claire Flowers. Claire was on the bank account joint with our mother. Once I received the bank statement from my sister, I immediately suspected that the Social Security number she was using that was on the bank statement was actually a tax ID number. I was not sure of this, but I suspected this because I knew I was missing World War II Series E bonds in the final accounting of my trust when it was closed March of 2007. I originally suspected this was possibly my tax ID number that she and my trust attorney, Floyd Melton Jr., withheld from me. I originally thought she was using my tax ID number with this Trustmark Bank account she opened so she could embezzle my World War II Series E bonds. It never dawned on me that my mother was actually using another person's Social Security number to embezzle from my trust. I had no idea that she was that desperate to get money. I guess I should have been aware that she was desperate when she told me she was $250,000 in debt to the IRS in 2001 and that she couldn't get out of debt and pay them off. Then suddenly she paid them off and had all kinds of extra money on the side to spend. My mother also had a very bad drug habit from abusing morphine. She was 105 pounds from abusing prescription morphine prescribed to her around the time that she was embezzling from my trust. Don't think that she worked alone. She had plenty of help embezzling from my trust up until her death on August the 25th, 2006. I will always suspect that my mother, Brenda B. Flowers, was murdered because of her involvement with organized criminals that essentially were just using her to get to her assets and my assets. My mother died of a heart attack while she was under the care of Dr. John Trotter on August the 25th, 2006 in Jackson, Mississippi. Dr. John Trotter is the brother-in-law to attorney Floyd Melton III, and he is also involved with my breach of fiduciary I have with my trust fund. He is involved because he has taken some of the money that was embezzled and laundering the money from my trust and cleaning it by buying property. If you want to learn more about Dr. John Trotter, then you can listen to my true crime episode on my podcast called Getting to Know Organized Criminal Cardiologist Dr. John Trotter. Dr. John Trotter will eventually be indicted, and so will his sister, Lisa Trotter Melton, because she's also involved with my breach of fiduciary I have with my trust fund. There are many people involved with the breach of fiduciary I have with my trust fund, and you would think this would be so if there's over 20 years of criminal activity that's been conducted involved with my breach of fiduciary I have with my trust. But not only is there criminal activity being conducted with my trust, there's plenty of criminal activities that has been conducted with my mother's estate and my stepfather, Richard Harold Flowers' estate. When everything is said and done and my case with my breach of fiduciary I have with my trust is going full speed ahead in court, later on down the line there will be other indictments on charges for my mother's estate and my stepfather's estate. Floyd Melton Jr. not only mishandled my trust, but he also mishandled my mother's estate. So I will also be able to sue for my mother's estate, which makes me feel so happy. That's just more money I will be getting from my civil lawsuit now, isn't it? And think about all the money I will get from my lawsuit when I'm going to sue Trustmark Bank. They have all the money now, don't they? I'm thinking as soon as I'm through suing Trustmark Bank, they're not going to be open anymore after I'm done with them. They're going to be broke, and their doors will be closed. I called Trustmark Bank this year in Greenwood, Mississippi, and asked about the Social Security number that my mother had opened with a bank account under her name. Trustmark Bank gave me confirmation who the Social Security number belonged to and told me the account was still open and they couldn't give me any more information than this. That right there is my case, and that's what I'm going to use when I go to court and civilly sue Trustmark Bank, because they're knowingly involved with criminal activity with these white-collar attorneys at Melton Law Firm and have been for the past 20 years. It's not just Melton's law firm that was doing the embezzling from my trust and are involved with an organized criminal enterprise in Greenwood, Mississippi. Lisa Trotter Melton and her family, the Trotters, are also a crime family that is very involved in running an organized criminal enterprise with the Meltons. So I decided to send a complaint form I downloaded off the internet to the Attorney General's office in Jackson, Mississippi in January 2020 this year. It was a form that I found on the internet that you use to report identity theft. I filled out the form and put down Melton's law firm's name with the attorneys that are involved with their names on the form. The Attorney General is the chief legal officer and advisor for the state of Mississippi on both civil and criminal matters. The Attorney General's responsibility is to represent public officials and government agencies and to issue legal opinions that interpret state law. The Attorney General has the sole power under Mississippi law to bring or defend a lawsuit on behalf of the state. The Attorney General acts as a counsel to state agencies and defends them or brings suit on their behalf. Most importantly, the office is charged with representation of people of the state of Mississippi. The work of the office is performed through the 18 divisions in the Attorney General's office. That is what is said on the Attorney General's office website about Lynn Finch, the head of Attorney General's office in Jackson, Mississippi. But unfortunately, it's just a whole bunch of BS because the Attorney General's office doesn't protect and help victims that are trying to get justice. The Attorney General's office helps organized criminals, especially those organized criminals that run their judicial system in Greenwood, Mississippi. I filled out the form with the Attorney General's office completely and properly. I then mailed it to the Attorney General's office in Jackson, Mississippi. After I mailed it to the Attorney General's office in Jackson, Mississippi, I called the Attorney General's office in Jackson, Mississippi, and spoke to the Consumer Protection Division with the Attorney General's office in Jackson, Mississippi. I was then assigned to an identity theft investigator that goes by the name of Leslie Owens. She was supposed to help me investigate my case. She was, in my opinion, not helpful in the least bit. I had a terrible time trying to get my investigation with my case properly done with the Attorney General's office. From the beginning to the end of when my case was closed and after my case was closed, I had even a worse time trying to get my investigation reopened and properly investigated with the Attorney General's office. The investigation into the identity theft involved with my breach of fiduciary I have with my trust fund went nowhere with the Attorney General's office in Jackson, Mississippi. There are reasons for why I never got anywhere with the Attorney General's office with my case. The main reason is because they don't want attorneys and a judge indicted on identity theft and embezzlement charges because of who they are and because they're all politically connected. These white-collar attorneys and organized criminals have been conducting their organized criminal enterprise for over 20 years now. Then I came along. Now I'm going to make sure that their organized criminal enterprise is shut down. But regardless of my struggle to get the Attorney General's office to investigate, Leslie Owen would still never communicate with me about my case. She spoke to me 2 times on the phone, and that was about it. She never called me to ask me any questions about anything. She never referred me to the FBI or Secret Service or handed my case to them to have them investigate it. Eventually, Leslie Owens was relieved of her job from the Attorney General's office in Jackson, Mississippi. Then, one person that I worked with that was head of her division she was assigned with in the consumer protection was that person, Crystal Udall-Sequoy. I was referred to work with her because Leslie Owens was relieved of her job. But when I contacted Crystal, she never would return any of my emails and calls. So that left me at another dead end in my quest to get the Attorney General's office to investigate my identity theft case with my mother involved with my breach of fiduciary I have with my trust. Let me read to you about who Crystal Udall-Sequoy is on the Attorney General's website. This is the lady that refused to help me. Crystal Udall-Sequoy is the director of the Mississippi Attorney General's Office in Consumer Protection Division. Crystal leads and participates in civil litigations and litigation relating to unfair and deceptive business practices, including privacy and antitrust in conjunction with other Attorney General and federal agencies. She previously advised the Attorney General's office on policy and issues and served as legislative liaison. Crystal is certified information privacy professional and a member of the International Association of Privacy Professionals. Prior to joining the Attorney General's office, Crystal served as pro bono counsel for the Mississippi Center for Justice for years, where she received the Spirit of Service Award from the Corporation for National and Community Service and awards from Governor Hallie Barbour and the American Red Cross. Lastly, Crystal practiced law in Charleston, South Carolina, before returning home to Mississippi to coordinate Katrina-related legal aid and pro bono for MCJ in 2006. She obtained an international business degree from the College of Charleston and her JD from the Mississippi College of Law. Crystal is a lector and a litanist at St. Andrew's Episcopal Cathedral and serves on the cathedral's Children and Youth Commission and Parish Life Commission. Well, that's quite impressive, Crystal. If you could only live by your credentials and stand by them, why don't you? By ignoring my phone calls and leaving messages for you and emails, you prove that you don't support the victims. You support the criminals by protecting them so they don't get investigated. We all know after investigation, then comes the indictments with the U.S. Attorney's Office, now doesn't it? But the Attorney General's office in Jackson, Mississippi, they don't want that. I hope my battle that I've gone through at the Attorney General's office for almost a year now will help others that are victims of identity theft get justice if they are having similar problems with the Attorney General's office in Jackson, Mississippi, properly investigating their identity theft case. As time went by, I received a letter around the second week of February from Attorney General's office, prosecuting attorney Eric Ray. He stated that my case was closed and they could not find any criminal activity being conducted. I was very surprised when I found out my case had been closed. Now, how is it that I have a bank statement with my mother's name on it and another person's social security number that she was using, and I did a search with the Department of Treasury under my mother's name and this other person's social security number, and later the search would come back stating that my mother had cashed out World War II Series E bonds under her name and this other person's social security number. I have this evidence in black and white, and the Attorney General's office acts like it doesn't exist. They completely ignore it to the point of saying there's no criminal activity being conducted. Well, there is plenty of criminal activity being conducted, and prosecuting attorney Eric Ray eventually agreed with me that this is so. I called him and spoke to him in March of 2020 after I could not get the police in Greenwood to investigate my case. I will have on another episode dedicated to the police department in Greenwood, Mississippi, about what I went through with them in my case. I want everyone to know how the police department in Greenwood, Mississippi supports organized crime. They're going to love this episode, so please don't miss out on it when it drops on a later date. I also have another episode coming out on a later date about how I was treated by the U.S. Attorney's Office in Oxford, Mississippi, with my breach of fiduciary I have with my trust fund and my mother's name being used with identity theft by organized criminals that are running the judicial system in Mississippi. So I decided I should call prosecuting attorney Eric Ray, and I asked him why he did not see any criminal activity being conducted with my breach of fiduciary I have with my trust. I asked him, how is it that the search I did with the Department of Treasury with my mother's name and her using another person's social security number doesn't count as criminal activity? Eric Ray, in my opinion, was surprised when I told him this, but he was also upset. He told me, well, I guess you're right, Jane. There is criminal activity being conducted, and we'll just have to reopen your case and have it investigated again. This never happened. My case was never reopened, and eventually the Attorney General's office relieved Eric Ray of his job as prosecuting attorney at the Attorney General's office in Jackson, Mississippi. Now Eric Ray works as a criminal defense lawyer at the Crowley Law Firm located at 946 North Jefferson Street, Jackson, Mississippi, 39202. After Eric Ray was relieved of his job in May of 2020, I then once again contacted the Attorney General's office in June of 2020 and spoke to the Public Integrity Division with the Attorney General's office. I was not able to get anyone at the Attorney General's office in any of the divisions to find my case and have it reopened. I sent all the information that I had about the search I did with the Department of Treasury with my mother's name and this other person's social security number to the Attorney General's office. They also had the Trustmark bank statement with my mom's name on it and the other person's social security number. Regardless if they had all these leads in my case that proves that there was criminal activity being conducted, it still didn't matter what I had said to any of the investigators at the Attorney General's office. I am going to go through every investigator that was supposed to help me, but they didn't help me. Every investigator I asked to help me told me my case was closed and there was nothing they could do about it. What do you think about how I was treated by the Attorney General's office so far? I'm not done yet telling you how they treated me, but what do you think so far? Regardless of all the information that I sent over to them, they told me my case was closed. The second investigator I spoke to with the Attorney General's office was in the Public Integrity Division. Investigator Miss Ward. I sent her emails, all of the information about my case, and spoke to her over the phone a couple of times. She never returned any of my calls and never got back to me about my case, and she completely ignored me. I was later referred to another investigator that goes by the name of Mr. Bilbo Melton. I was referred to him, and I was unknowing after I was referred to him that he was not even able to help me, but I still explained to him everything that was going on with my case, hoping he would be able to help me. He could have told me when I was explaining everything to him that he could not help me, but he didn't do that. He let me tell him everything that was going on with my case, and then he said, okay, well, let me look into it and I'll get back to you. He never got back to me. But he did tell me that the people that I was accusing of involved with my breach of fiduciary were really good people and Christians, and they would never do anything as I'm suggesting that they are involved in. He verbally told me this over the phone. I would later talk to Mr. Bilbo Melton at a later date in June 2020. He said he never said that about the Meltons or the Trotters, how they are just law-abiding people. And I am wrong. He also told me that he doesn't handle cases like mine because he handles murder investigations. Well, then why in the hell did he tell me in the beginning that he handles murder investigations and refer me to the proper person to investigate my case? It's because he was trying to stall me, and he didn't want my case to get investigated because he didn't want his friends, who he respected, to go to jail. This is why. I got the runaround for over 11 months now with the Attorney General's office in Jackson, Mississippi, all because they're trying to protect organized criminals that are most of these people work there at the Attorney General's office are friends with. Mr. Bilbo Melton referred me to Agent Larry Ware with the Attorney General's office. Agent Larry Ware is a criminal investigator, and he was named the Attorney General's office top cop in May of 2020. I found this out on the internet at McGeeNews.com. The article states, last week, our own Larry Ware was presented with a Top Cop award, which is given to the top law enforcement officer at the federal and state and local levels. Larry serves as a criminal investigator to our Public Integrity Division and has worked at the Attorney General's office for 11 years. This is Larry's second Top Cop award, and I, Lynn Finch, congratulated him on the well-deserved recognition. Well, I hate to say it, but I'm going to go ahead and say it. Larry Ware, you're not that much of a top cop now, are you? If you can't get my investigation properly investigated with the Attorney General's office, and I sent over a letter with all the documents that you needed to help investigate my case, I called you repeatedly for weeks on end in June 2020 and emailed you. The end result was Larry stalling me, and then he told me my case is closed and there's nothing else that he can do to help me. After weeks of calling him and sending him a package in the mail with documentation about the criminal activity that's being conducted with my breach of fiduciary I had with my trust fund and the identity theft with my mother's name, he still waited about a month to tell me my case is closed and there's nothing he can do about it. When he told me this, I asked him why he would say this to me when I explained to him in a past email. I stated in the email to him that I had spoken to prosecuting attorney Eric Ray, who had originally ruled on my case that there was no identity theft, and then later he had told me verbally over the phone in March 2020 that he would reopen my case because I was right. There was indeed identity theft involved with my case. If criminal investigator Larry Ware was such a top cop, he would easily be able to find out from Eric Ray that the case needs to be reopened. But he didn't find out from him, and he told me there's nothing he could do about my case because it was closed. End of story. I called and complained again to the Attorney General's office about what Agent Larry told me. I was then referred to another investigator with the Attorney General's office. The next investigator I was referred to goes by the name of Tony Geiger. I was referred to Tony Geiger, and I spoke to him over the phone around August the 16th, 2020. He informed me that I should go ahead and email to him over all the information I had about my breach of fiduciary I have with my trust and my mother's name being used with identity theft so he could properly investigate my case with the Attorney General's office. Right after I spoke to him, I emailed over the information that he requested. I never heard back from Tony Geiger, and a few days later I texted him on his cell phone. I said in my text message, "Good afternoon, Tony. My name is Brenda B. I am contacting you about the email I sent you a few days ago. Were you able to review my email and look into my claim? I just wanted to know if you were able to. Please help me get my case reopened and investigated properly. Please get back to me about this. Thank you." I sent him a text message on his phone asking him to contact me back, and he never would. Eventually, after about a week, Tony Geiger called me back because I told him the Secret Service were working on my case and I needed him to talk to me about it. He called me back sarcastically and said, "Well, then just get them to help you," and that he didn't need to speak to them. I told Tony that he misunderstood what I had told him and my message I left him. I told him that currently the Secret Service were not helping me and could he please assist me because I had information now on the person's name to the Social Security number my mother, Attorney Floyd Melton Jr., and Trustmark Bank were using to embezzle from my trust. Tony said, "Sure, give me his name. Who is he?" I didn't feel comfortable with the way Tony had been treating me, but I still gave him the Secret Service agent's name. Tony told me he handed my case over to an investigator at the Attorney General's office, and if that investigator had any questions, he'd be sure to give me a call. I asked him the name of the person who was investigating my case with the Attorney General's office, and Tony told me I had no right to that information. Why the hell wouldn't I have right to this information? I asked him. He just said, "You don't." Before I got off the phone with Tony, he laughed at me on the phone while we were speaking. I thought this was very disrespectful and unprofessional of him to treat me the way he did. It's just another example how the Attorney General's office in Jackson, Mississippi treat the victims of identity theft and embezzlement. To make a long story short, Tony hung up the phone and never got back to me about my case, and it was never investigated with the Attorney General's office. I would later send a text message, and the last text message I am going to send to Tony's phone on November the 16th, 2020. In this last text message I sent to Tony, I sent him a link to this podcast that you're listening to now. I told Tony that I'm going to expose him and everyone else at the Attorney General's office and how they have treated me with my investigation, with my breach of fiduciary I have with my trust fund, and my mother's name being used with identity theft. Do you think that Tony listened to my podcast that talks about the criminal activity that Christian, respected, white-collar attorneys and their families are conducting while they're running an organized criminal enterprise in Greenwood, Mississippi? Of course he did. Do you think he reached out to those people that are involved with my breach of fiduciary and he had a chit-chat with them? I would say so, most definitely. I would even go as far as to say that Tony likes to get paid off, and he likes to have his pockets lined with dirty money, so he'll stop investigations and keep his mouth closed. I'm the victim here. My life is in danger. These criminals are going to keep conducting their organized criminal enterprise if they're not indicted. Tony doesn't care about victims. Neither do most of the people at the Attorney General's office in Jackson, Mississippi, care about victims, in my opinion. They care about getting their pockets lined with dirty money so they'll shut up and stop investigating. Tony Geiger treated me like I was a criminal. He was disrespectful to me in the way he spoke to me. He laughed at me after our conversation that we had over the phone. I asked him not to laugh at me, that this was disrespectful, and why was he laughing at me? I said to him over the phone. Am I funny to you? I said to him, Tony. Why are you laughing at me? He hung up in my face after I said this to him. Tony also likes to hang up in people's faces. Let me tell you about who Tony is and what he does for the Attorney General's office in Jackson, Mississippi. Tony Geiger works as the Consultant Outreach Division of the Attorney General's office in Jackson, Mississippi. Tony Geiger currently serves as the Director of the Constituent Outreach for the Office of the Attorney General. He has more than 35 years of experience in management, marketing, and sales. Prior to the Office of the Attorney General, Tony most recently served 8 years as the Director of Unclaimed Property for the Office of Treasury, Lynn Fitch. In that capacity, Tony played a key role in returning over $105 million to the citizens of Mississippi. He was worked in the private sector as an energy efficiency consultant as well as business development. Tony attended the University of Mississippi and is a graduate of Mississippi College. Tony Geiger was very unprofessional in the way he handled my case. Not only was he unprofessional, he also supports organized crime by not helping my case get investigated properly by the Attorney General's office. Regardless of all the setbacks that I've had with these government officials that work supposedly for us, the victims of identity theft and embezzlement, I'm still pushing forward with my case, and I'm still going to get indictments on these crooks. And so should you. If you're having a similar problem with the Attorney General's office in Mississippi, don't back down. Keep up your fight for justice. I'm not going to let them keep using my mother's name with identity theft and running their organized criminal enterprise while they run the judicial system in Greenwood, Mississippi. I have faith justice will prevail. I also have faith my podcast is going to expose them and their crimes. What do you all think? Did you enjoy so far listening to my podcast? Do you find it quite interesting that I'm exposing all these crooks? There's not many podcasts like mine out now, is there? I would think not. If you're enjoying what you've been hearing, then please stick around for more episodes dropping semi-weekly and weekly. This pretty much concludes what I went through with the Attorney General's office, trying to get them to investigate my case with the identity theft associated with the breach of fiduciary I have with my trust. If you listen to my podcast and you have similar problems with the Attorney General's office, and getting them to investigate your case, then I'm sure by now you have realized that you're not the only one that is going through the runaround with the Attorney General's office. I'm not sure if I'm ever going to get justice until I get an attorney, but believe me, I'm going to keep trying to get one to take my case. Please stay tuned for more true crime stories with episodes dropping semi-weekly and weekly. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe and leave a comment. Until then, I'll see you next episode. Goodbye, everyone.